Hello again, I'm Greg. So, this is chapter 4, if you will, of part 2 of our journey through hermeneutics. We're talking about image, its development, and also how it goes along really well with the second basic form of modern hermeneutics, modern interpretation, and that is the historical hermeneutics associated with the great German scholar Wilhelm Dilthey. Let's talk today about how the image does what it does. Okay? How specifically a piece of visual art can transport us elsewhere, can transcend seemingly both culture and history, and do all of those things for someone like ourselves who is a child of their own time and their own time only. Okay? How does that work, and how do we sort of interact with images in that way? Why are images so powerful? This is the Miraculous Mirage. So, given this second extension of hermeneutics, which we spoke about last time, the problem of interpretation when faced with imagery becomes both diffuse and diffused. One might suggest at this juncture that the amorphous quality of image, okay, and think about how we use the term today, right, to really kind of more references public presentation of self, like self-image, or corporate entity, government, or what have you, and as such the meaning it generates is quite narrow in that sense, right? But this quality of the concept of image allows us to avoid confronting any specific meaningfulness imagery in general might promote. Okay? Even if the metaphysics associated with the agrarian worldview is itself long moribund, there is a perduring presence of the idea of the ideas. Okay? That is to say, the conception of image, as opposed to the real thing, is degraded as inauthentic, unreal, or lesser in value, in some other manner, unspecified. But images, too, have their own profundity. Think about John Dowland's beautiful lyrics in his famous song, Come Heavy Sleep, which begins with this very powerful image, right? He says, Come heavy sleep, the image of true death. Okay? Remember, for the Greeks, sleep and death are brothers. Okay? They're siblings. And Heraclitus' famous fragment, right, regarding how when we are awake, we only touch the sleeper, but the sleeper touches death in his sleep. So John Dowland is riffing off that. But we also, in spite of that, have a lingering sense that the very term itself promotes a kind of mask or copy or echo. The masquerade of imagery is said to be as well, within the stance of transcendental metaphysics, the agrarian metaphysics, the only one available to mere mortals. There are nothing other than images upon the walls of Plato's cave, for instance. And today, some technocratic types claim they are suspicious that we are living in nothing more than a simulacrum, a matrix of sophisticated generative and self-generative imagery. Okay? This is a staple in entertainment fiction now. And yet, it's a very old idea. Old, but not primordial. The agrarian mindset invented the other world, and the source of the impetus to such conception was bad conscience at losing the relative paradise of subsistence and the social contract, and the resentment for being unable to regain it, and thus the nostalgia for it, generating just such attempts at simulacra. This potent admixture accomplished on the one hand the esoteric world systems, great projections of human aspirations and ideals, and on the other, the ruthless extinguishing of all remaining traditional societies around the globe. It's almost like we were saying to ourselves, well, if we can't live like that, then no one should, right? So we're talking about conquest, colonialism, and then there's sense that all of the traditional or indigenous peoples of the world should really just simply be wiped out. Okay, they're a evolutionary throwback or whatever. And yet, I think that we can certainly see understand our resentment against people who seem to live more or less effortlessly within the bounds of nature because mainly of incredibly low population load. So this saying, if we can't live like that, no one should, could be the gloss for those colonial conquests, which lasted at least half a millennium. At the same time, our nostalgia for paradise grossly gentrifies the reality of subsistence life with its earthy, sometimes guttural existence. It's promoted a Rousseauistic lens with the, good old noble savage attuned to the wider nature, having nothing of the rape of the world upon his own conscience. Again, low population load is key. Just so, all of this cultural evolution, so called, is clearly and entirely a material issue and not one of conscience at all. Once again, at the risk of further besmirching the concept of image, here we must recognize that imagery can often play us false, even when not deliberately designed to do so. As in dreams, so in waking life, the painter conjures a landscape or character, event, or allegory, and we are left to do the interpretative work. Some images are specifically created to sow discontent and conflict. All propaganda against them or the enemy is such an example, with the remainder being present to reassure the false consciousness of the we or the us, friends, allies. Marketing images are designed to sell and sell alone, and of late, marketing and ideology have proven they can run hand in hand. We are bombarded with imagery, which has its function to either delude, manipulate, shame, or convert. Think about all of the misinformation, disinformation, and, of late, all of the AI manipulation that can occur digitally and in other spaces as well, whether it's deep fake pornography or some other nonsense that has people doing things that they in fact never did do or never would do. And all of this is part of our sense of what an image can be today, right? So here we are. We have delusion, manipulation, shaming, or conversion, which with much less available imagery having to do with disillusion, demythology, critique, or even simple empirical reportage, right? All of the things that images can do on the constructive side. It is not surprising, therefore, that we distrust the very idea of image, given most of its contemporary usage. Though a challenge for hermeneutics, perhaps the most important aspect of the interpretation of imagery is maintaining its critical stance. We do not take images at face value. In the same way, we are more prone to take the things themselves. And though, to borrow as an example the most valuable logo of recent years, a Ferrari advertisement is not a Ferrari itself, the object itself is its own imagic projection of not only a coveted lifestyle item, but the lifestyle as a whole, which comes to be associated with owning, or at least driving, this particular car or other marks in its same class. Automobiles are indeed the usual example of post-vend marketing, for names of makes and models adorn all vehicles. This free advertising is free for the manufacturer and is of course free for the viewer, but not quite so for the owner, for this person does not own the rights to the logo which appears on his car, and thus he is performing free labor on behalf of the corporation simply by commuting each day to work. Yet the logo does pay the vehicle owner simply by its presence and having others gaze at it, so there is a return of some sort, right? The same emotions are again in play. That conscience that I have not made enough of myself in this life to own a Ferrari, certainly that's the case for myself, resentment that others somehow have done so, or apparently so, and nostalgia, driving the romance of myself having another shot at it, or living a different life as a child and youth. We might well say to ourselves, well, what if my life had been different? Maybe I would be driving that car right now. What would have had to have happened, or who would I have had to have been? And who is this person? Who is that person, apparently? Okay, all of those questions come up because we see the logo on an object that we ourselves are unfamiliar with as an owner. So the Ferrari, again, to keep with our example, as an object or as a thing in space, expresses the residuum of paradise. This is very important. Okay? These kinds of sort of high-end commodities are expressions ultimately of our nostalgia, our resentment, and our bad conscience regarding the ideal and the myth of Eden. Okay? The Ferrari is an expression of the residuum of paradise. It is an element of the very best humanity can conjure over against the drudgery of earthly life, forever divorced from the Edenic social contract. It is also a triumph of human ingenuity and engineering. And, lest we ourselves begin to hear sound like a Ferrari advertisement, all of this within the confines of mortal life, with all of its vicissitudes and mischance, the Ferrari or like object is an emblem of the resonance of paradise, but sequestered upon the earth, and outside, of course, the space of Eden. The lifestyle associated with the finest objects of whatever sort is itself an image, as well as a reality. It is precisely here that the agrarian distinction between world and other world breaks down, for its major evidence in the this world is that of being able to distinguish the genuine from the copy, the thing itself, from an image thereof. Increasingly now, we do not have the ability to make that distinction. Okay, so the Ferrari, for one, demolishes this boundary. Its reality is its imagery, and its image a sole reality. Yet it has another layer of authenticity with which to inure itself to paradise. It itself is a non-human space or entity, just as was the garden. In previous ages, rulers in archaic civilizations and in antiquity pretended to be gods on earth, but their immortality was hung up upon the ability to preserve the image of divinity outside the realm of the divine. After all, by definition, they were gods, but they were gods on earth. They weren't gods in heaven, at least at that time. Mortal, none of these actually human beings could ultimately vouchsafe their claim and had to fall back upon the standard otherworldly definition of Godhead to be discovered in the afterlife. It is only in our present day that our technological prosthesis has been able to conjure objects other to us, which take on the mantle of paradise. Recall that the first humans simply lived in such a space, whether ethnographically or mythically. They neither created it nor were responsible for its upkeep. The finest motor car, of course, requires maintenance from time to time. But this is not because of what it is in itself, but rather, and just so, because it exists in the this world, with all of its decay, corruption, entropy, and just plain rust. Our human progenitors had no need of any of this, as long as they remained ensconced in the other world's paradise. Labor was their sentence upon the expulsion, and of course, death itself. And while evil was not itself absent in the garden, one still had to come to know it as present. In the moment this was accomplished by proverbially serpentine ways and means, we also realized what indeed was the good, and this especially so, as we were about to lose our grip on it. All of this imagery resonates in our modern day simply because intimations of good and evil, though never present in their mythically pure form, characterize the life of the this world denizen. We are as the characters in a Caravaggio painting, our chiaroscuri, an interplay of light and shadow, just as are our consciences, and so our dreams. It has become almost impossible to describe, or even to describe reality elsewise from images. Given this condition, the interpretation of imagery must confront an even deeper puzzle. What is it about human perception that favors the visual over any other possible sense? Is our entire worldview and its very perceptual ontology based only upon the niche quirk of primate evolution and its reliance upon the eyes? It would be reductionist in the extreme to cast such a sophisticated apparatus upon a mere physiological device. It can't be only that, right? Certainly the proclivity to see the world is present, and perhaps from primordiality. Even so, the other physical senses are nonetheless present and remain important. And we have invented, over against blindness, various other contraptions and ingenious means, such as Braille, to navigate the perilous loss of sight. Might we do the same, then, for the loss of sighted worldview? What I mean by this is that paradise, almost by definition, either mythic in general or cosmogonic in particular, presents itself as a vision. When Nietzsche explains how the real world became a myth, title of one of his little sections, he does not concentrate on either the visionary as a goal or the visualization process used to attain it, but rather critiques the language of otherworldly propaganda, for lack of a better term, or marketing. The other world, the centerpiece of myth itself, as well as the source for all that is mythical, gains in reality the more the this world loses not its realism, but rather its value. We have been deluded into overvaluing a myth at the expense of reality, and Nietzsche clearly has in mind not so much maligning the long-forgotten calumniation of the priests, again a phrase from him, but rather the very much the present, the manipulation of our faculties by governments and other institutions. Religion might have provided the original expression of this artifice, which is at base a self-delusion, but it no longer is the evil clear and present, and that, aside from the fact that the church had itself already been denuded of its vision for earth and heaven alike. Though ironically an auto-allegorical commentary, Nietzsche's purveying of a fable to examine another fable is hardly novel. What he adds that is more radical is that we are to understand that our entire Weltanschauung, our world perception, rests upon the fabulous, not so much in its epistemology, but rather in its very deontology. This is a stunning revelation for a period entranced by the new concept of evolution and about to be disturbed by the yet newer concept of the unconscious. Nietzsche envisions a lack of vision. He claims current deontology is both a demythology inverted. What is that? The mythic has become more real than reality remains, and yet reality is itself now a myth, but is as well an affirmation that our vision has lost its acuity, not in ethical blindness, but instead by way of a corrupted optics. We see not only what we are told to see, but also how we ourselves wish to see. Sight is thus a handicap against truth. In linguistically framing the visionary, the language of ontology speaks into being nothing less than being itself, capital B. It has no other source or destination. From this follows a third challenge to the hermeneutics of imagery. Can we take anything at face value without fatally devaluing it? Can we relate to beings without asking after their relationship to being? Can we interrogate existence without the bulwark, possibly wholly imaginary, of essence? And given that essence has itself been co-opted, might we recover the keenest eagle of observation alone without being distracted by the airy visionary? If the visual disconnect between surface and depth, between role and self, and between life world and world combine to set up a daunting framework for the interpretation of imagery, we have to be alert to the problem of applying the very same distinctions in our own interrogative and critical work. We cannot simply tell ourselves to look more deeply without having alongside this the notion that there really is something more to this or that, and that an image is by definition simply a surface upon which much of only ourselves is necessarily reflected. At the same time, we have to work as well to distinguish images which present their entire being upon such a surface, which is at hand, without hiding anything else, and those images which are meant to obscure more than they reveal. This is one major aspect of the basic hermeneutics of the image, at once describing what the image does itself intend and what are its subtexts, what, in a word, allows it to maintain a connection between its intent and its delivery. Dilthey's historicity provides us with a key element of our own encounter with the image, whether it is a work of art along the way to becoming an aesthetic object, a piece of advertising, an object that has the dual function of presenting a wider image, such as the Ferrari, or simply how another person has dressed and presented herself. It is no longer the author himself who is key to any of this, as it was in Romantic hermeneutics, our first form of method. But nevertheless, such imagined authority yet adheres to the image in question, depersonalized, and thus historicized. Wilhelm Dilthey asks us, from whence does this authority come, and to whom is it directed? In this most basic rendition of the historical hermeneutics, we find the very questions we ourselves most need to ask. Thank you.